I checked, nothing's unplugged, and I couldn't tell what was on and off, so I wish you the best luck. On page 39. There's a picture of exactly this sort of cluster sampling idea. We have geographic regions marked out in this picture up here. And in each one of those sections, we then pick how many sections we want. And out of those sections, we then sample from those. We don't have to sample from all of them. But let's say we said we've got, I don't know, 10 different sections here. We're going to pick 3 of them at random. And then within those 3, we'll take 4 items from each group. I could do this to ask about opinions on campus, right? I've got a certain number of dorm buildings. I could randomly select floors from each dorm. And then within each floor, then randomly select rooms. Now I've stratified my sample. I'm not getting it completely from one location. The easiest way to do this is usually, as I said, geographically, you go by block by block, location by location. This lowers costs. Why would this make costs cheaper? Why would it be more convenient to do a cluster sample? If I'm randomly sampling in Westmoreland County, I could get someone who lives in downtown Greensburg, and the next person could live in Murraysville. The person after that could live in Ligonier. I got to drive all over the county, don't I? But if I do cluster sampling, then I can go and say, okay, we're going to check 6 neighborhoods out of the 50 or so neighborhoods that call themselves neighborhoods in Westmoreland County. I then have 10 samples with each neighborhood. I don't have to drive all over the place to get those 10 samples. It's localized, it's right there. And so I can move from place to place instead of crisscrossing the county multiple times. If it's difficult to obtain the strata, if it's hard to decide what the characteristics of the population are, then this might be easier to do strictly geographically. And it allows me to make my overarching sampling easier. Hallelujah.
Gotcha. I gotta replace something in there because it's just tripping every so often.
Thank you. It's who's nearby. And near becomes near to each other, not just necessarily near to me. But these are beneficial when we want to take regional variance into account. A question for you. Do you think voting preferences change by distance to the city center? It's a yes/no question. Why? Why do you think that, Max?
I mean, it's like different areas, so city hall, she's Democratic, where you go farther out, you're doing the farmland, and you know,
Yeah. So in urban environments tend to lean more Democratic. Rural environments tend to lean more Republican. Suburban environments can be fairly different depending on where they are. So you could go geographically, I want to get this many samples inside the city, this many samples in these different suburbs, and this many samples that are rural to get a good feel for voting behavior. Regional variances ideally connect with this cluster sampling idea. So the Bureau of Labor and Statistics in the federal government uses cluster sampling a lot for exactly this reason. They will say, we're going to do a geographically driven set of surveys so that they can match this sort of regional variance. State by state, a lot of variation occurs in the same way as rural versus urban, as does northern versus southern, as eastern versus western. There's a lot of benefit to this type of sampling. Questions? All of these methods are really random sampling ideas at the heart of it, whether it's pattern or clustered or simply numbers from a hat. We good so far? Any priority? So what are some non-random methods? Random included all of these things at the heart of that. Even if we drove to extremes to try and spread out our randomness, we really were doing randomized sampling. So what sort of non-random methods are useful? Well, the easiest one is convenience sampling. Who's near that I can ask? If I want to get opinions about campus events, probably the best thing for me to do is put a table right at the door to low dining hall and just ask every student that walks by. Maybe I'll get some responses, maybe I won't, but at least they're here. And I get those answers directly from the people in front of me. Do you think that convenience sampling to get opinions about what's going on campus like that catches an accurate picture of all of the students? If I'm going to put a table in low dining hall at lunch and ask people, I'm going to miss a lot of students, aren't I? Anybody who's a commuter who only comes for night classes, anybody who doesn't eat lunch on campus, all of these people are gone. I don't get a chance to talk to them. So convenience sampling just says, who's here that I can ask? So there are some inherent issues with that, but it does get you really low cost, usually. It is also reasonable, not unexpected, to rely on the opinion of an expert. Judgment sampling. Some expert decides this is a typical whatever you're trying to get at. This is the type of person you're looking for. Here's where I've found them. I'm going to curate this group that you're going to ask. And you're trusting someone else's judgment to find the group you want. It is quite possible that this also includes some automatically implicit biases in whoever your expert is, right? You could say, what is the typical American family that I want to ask questions about to find out about people in America? You'll get wildly different responses depending on who you talk to, yes? A piece of speculative science fiction from, I believe, the mid-1950s, short story by Alfred Bester, I think, talked about the power of computers to extrapolate data analysis. I'm going to gather all this data and I'm going to extrapolate from it. Now, Bester was, in some senses, a very socialist writer, and he wrote about computer centralized planning. And in one of his stories, he wrote about planned economies. And if you have studied recent history in America versus Soviet era Russia, you'll see that the Russians were very fond of the planned economy. It was one of the tenets of the Communist Party. It tended to fail spectacularly because they didn't have enough data. But the author said, no, what if we could extrapolate all this data? He pictured this in America. We're going to build the best computer in the world, and it's going to extrapolate the data. And the multivac computer was going to run our planned economy. Do you know how many people multivac surveyed per election every 4 years? 1. And it could ask you questions for a solid day, and then it would go away. And all of a sudden, orders would come out and the planned economy would be laid out. Well, this is how many people we need doing this job, and this is how many schools we need here in this area, and roads we need in this area. And all of a sudden, it would all be decided. It's a very weird idea. But the extrapolation from a small set of data by an expert. That's what judgment sampling is about. And in that story, the expert was the computer. So the algorithm decided what our economy was going to be. Sometimes we do this by volunteer. Focus groups. You go select a panel of people, you ask them opinions, they are our sample. Now, how do you select them? Well, usually that's by committee, but it's also several people have made careers out of being on focus groups for different companies. So it's quite possible to do this, but then we end up with open-ended discussions. Instead of individual questions, the whole group talks back and forth to try to come to some consensus about what should be done about whatever thing they're dealing with. These methods have directly in them substantially more reliance on the person or persons designing and doing the survey. Whoever that expert is whose judgment we're relying on, whoever are the selectors for our focus group, this is definitely much less random. You do this every day. You have opted in to a number of places that collect lots of your data. Your Spotify account collects data on when you listen, what you listen to, what you listen to. You get that Spotify Wrapped list at the end of the year, right? What do they do with all that data? Do you have any idea? But you gave it to them willingly when you clicked, I agree. Loyalty cards. If you have a Giant Eagle Advantage card or a Shop and Save card or whatever grocery store you or your parents go to, you are being tracked with every single purchase. It made national news about a decade ago when a father walked in to buy toilet paper at a Giant Eagle, scanned his Advantage card and got a coupon for pregnancy tests. His daughter had been at the pharmacy earlier, used the family Advantage card and bought one. Oops. You give away this data regularly, and technology allows us to gather it and use it. There are some ethical implications here. How well should you guard your own information? Is it worth guarding this type of information? In a lot of cases, that's a question I can't answer directly for you. What is the information we are guarding and how well are we guarding? I don't know. Medical information, I want fences around that a mile high and a meter deep. My shopping habits at Giant Eagle, I don't give a damn. Which part of it is valuable to you? Which part of it is valuable to the advertisers? Which part of it is valuable to the shopping chains? What do you read online? What do you search for? What Google ads do you see on the side? That's the monopoly case that was brought last year against Google and Alphabet in general about their monopoly on the advertising industry. It's still being decided in the court. So there are lots of factors that go into picking how many people we're going to ask or survey or whatever it is. And in a lot of cases, those factors include things like how much does the survey cost? How much does it cost me to do each bumper when we're talking about bumper tests? How much is each bumper? How much is the test? How long is it going to take? I can also ask about how replicable are our results. If I do the survey today, and then you do the same survey next week, are the answers going to be close to each other or far away? Assuming we don't ask all the same people the same questions twice in a row. Replicability, time, cost, ability to get the data. I would love to do a survey of several things in medicine. There is no way on God's green earth I'm ever going to get permission from some of these people to figure this out. I'm doing a study on kidney health and diabetes, and I really wanted to do some very interesting mathematical evaluations of kidneys. There's just one problem. The actual test is physically destructive. So if I do this test on your kidney, I have to take it out of you. That's not a good thing. And I'm going to destroy the kidney in doing it. So let's not do that. Which means I can only get kidneys from medical volunteers who willed their body to science after they die. I don't want to do a study of healthy kidneys versus diseased kidneys if it means I destroy healthy kidneys and they can't go to people who gave their body to science, who would be happy to do organ transplants with those things. If I've got a healthy kidney, let's put it in somebody and save their lives rather than give it to me to do math with. So there's some ethical considerations in your experiment and how many things you can get at. Turned out I could get about 6 kidneys at a cost of roughly $25,000, about $4,000 a kidney. By the way, those were the sick ones, not the healthy ones. I couldn't get healthy. I also couldn't get $25,000 to do the study, so it didn't help. I've mentioned this word a number of times. Bias. Mathematically, bias is the over or underestimation of a parameter by a statistic. Now, last time I said that I made up a number and I said, let's suppose Westmoreland County is 60% Republican. I have no idea if that's right. But let's say I go out and do a survey, and it is right, but my survey says 47%, or my survey says 77%. I'm over or underestimating. How did that happen? Well, there are lots of different ways we can get bias and lots of different types of bias. Some bias is avoidable and some isn't. How many of you have been sent an email that asks you to take a survey? Did you take it?
Yeah.
Every time? There you go. Non-response bias. I send out 10,000 emails, 100,000 emails to people asking them to take a survey. How many responses do I get? Every semester, you are asked to evaluate your classes at the end of the term. Last semester, for the first time in 22 years of teaching at Seton Hill, I got a 100% response rate in a class. Once. In somewhere around 300 classes that I've taught. What happens? Somebody pushes that email off, I'll get to it later, and then it's the last day of class and they didn't do it. Poof, it's gone. I get it. But at the same time, the people who do decide to answer a survey are selecting themselves in. And usually those are people with strong opinions, not people with moderate opinions, right? So you get a lot of, he sucks, I never want him as a teacher again, and he was God, I learned everything. The truth is somewhere in the middle. But self-selection and non-response become that sort of questionable reliability of the data we get itself. Would you call into a talk show on the radio? Therefore, the people you hear on the radio calling into the talk shows are of a strong opinion one way or the other. Whether they're on whoever the modern version of Rush Limbaugh is, or they're on so-and-so's podcast, you're not going to call or listen or go directly, call or engage that way directly, but you're going to listen, that's fine. But you're selecting yourself to enter that group. Talked about this last time as well. If I ask people, who did you vote for in the presidential election? They might not want to tell me. They might lie to my face. They might look at me and say, I want to give the answer this person is looking for. I want to not seem out of the norm for this group that I'm standing in. When you ask somebody out at a club, at a bar, at the pool, at the dorm, in the lounge, wherever, when you ask somebody something in public, they're going to give you a publicly acceptable answer. It may or may not be how they actually feel. If I ask a question about, oh, I don't know, I'll pick a good one. I was over in McKenna this morning. I saw somebody walk across the gym barefoot. That was my reaction. So, there's a sign on the wall that says shoes are required, but they had taken them off to do something and then hadn't put them back on yet, walked across the gym. Okay, fine. If I walk up to somebody in the gym and say, do you wear shower shoes in the showers in the gym? How many people are going to say no? In public. Nobody. Pressure, peer pressure is going to cause conformity. It's going to cause people to want to save face. That changes the reliability of our responses. Can you control any of that? Nope. So that's an unavoidable bias. Unless you give every single respondent the opportunity to respond completely in private, and even then, completely anonymously. They still might not believe that it's truly anonymous, and then they won't answer honestly anyway. Coverage errors, coverage bias issues, include missing some important section of the population. Like I talked about with the Dewey beats Truman headline, the reason that survey was so slanted toward the Republican favor was because it was done as a phone survey and it missed all of the poorer people who didn't own phones, who at that time leaned heavily Democratic. So a coverage error makes me miss some section of the population, whatever that is. whether that's younger people, older people, people with or without certain kinds of technology and access, I have a problem. It is quite possible that the question I actually write down isn't going to give me the answer I want to know. Not the answer I want to have be true, but it won't actually answer the question I'm really trying to get at. If I want to know who you voted for, and I can't ask that question, how do I edge around it? I can ask whose policy, do you like this policy or this policy? Do you like this policy or this policy? I can try and figure out your leanings indirectly. It is illegal in a hiring interview for me to ask you about your plans to start a family. 100% illegal. I've seen some very interesting questions asked to try and figure out how soon do you plan on having children being asked to female interviewees. Was a really interesting workaround, but I will call the person out on the question. We scratched the question very quickly. It's against the law. If the question isn't going to measure what I want it to measure, I shouldn't ask that question. I should reframe it. Interviewer error. If me asking the questions would elicit different responses than Mike Swan asking the questions, than Harry asking the questions, than Yari asking the questions, that's the interviewer influencing the responses. How do we avoid that? Well, you can send out many different people to do the surveys. You can try and have the surveyors match the sample as closely as possible to build that sort of rapport between the questioner and the questioned. But I don't want me to be the reason that this survey fails. I don't want it to be literally my fault. That's something we can control. There is an uncontrollable piece of error we generally just call it sampling error. If you ask 20 people on campus a question today, you might get 8 one way and 12 the other. You ask that same question to 20 different people tomorrow, it might be 9 and 11. It might be 7 and 13. It might be 5 and 15. I don't know. That sort of randomness is uncontrollable. And that's our general idea of sampling error. Questions? Even when we can control them, we don't always do control them well. So we have to take these into account and examine them when we look at a collection of data. Oh, you brought this pile of data. Where'd you get it? Who'd you get it from? How did you get it? Do I have faith in the method by which you got and created all of this and put it together? On our Canvas page, we have all of the data files that are in our textbook. Every data file in chapter 2 is in that chapter 2 zip. So if I were to ask you to look at, where is that question? Question number 21 on page 42. Here's a list of 48 numbers about people who went to the movies and how old they are. It says quite explicitly, late night moviegoers, right? If I wanted you to do some sampling out of this group of 48 numbers, I wouldn't want you to literally have to write them all down again. So this file, Late Show, is included in this zip file. If you download it and unzip it, all of the data files indicated with this red file icon and name will appear in those data files. That way you have the option to not have to copy this into Excel manually. You can open it directly. Questions? So where do you get your data and who do you trust? Well, in a lot of cases, that's a judgment call. And nope, that's less readable. The idea of information literacy allows us to examine where our data came from and how reliable we think it is based on the source itself. I got this table off of Joe Schmo's weblog is different than I got this table off the Government Bureau of Labor and Statistics website. I got this table off of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and in that it showed me where they got it from. All of that sort of deciding on sources is part of determining the reliability of our data. But if I'm going to gather my data manually, I need to figure out what makes a good survey. So again, it now becomes a process like writing a paper. We have to go through this side sort of same way we build a research paper, the same way we build an essay. We have to build our survey. What are the goals? What are the things we're actually trying to find out? Once I identify what the question is, state the goals of the research. What am I actually trying to learn about? I wanted to know, is there a mathematically quantifiable way using a CT scan to determine if someone's kidneys are predisposed to advanced kidney disease? Yes or no? What's the budget? How much money do I have? How much money do I need? How many people do I have working on this? How long do I expect this to take? Once I can answer those questions, I can design the research project. And I said, I was hoping to get the same number of healthy kidneys and diagnosed sick kidneys, plasticize the vasculature, scan it with a millimeter length CT to digitize the plasticized behavior, and to then do some calculations on something called the Hausdorff dimension to see if I could find a clear distinction between healthy kidneys and ill kidneys. Target population, frame, sample size. I want 6 healthy, 6 ill. That's my population. I'm going to try and extrapolate to all people suffering from diabetes to see if I can make this work. Survey type. Okay, wait a minute. Now, survey type. Am I going to mail people stuff? Well, my survey, really not. I needed physical objects. But if I'm doing a survey, I could send you a letter. I used to get about every year or two a consumer survey. It was like 7 or 8 pages. And it asked me about brands and whether or not I knew anything about these brands and whether or not I bought these sorts of products and where did I shop for them. And I think it included like a $20 bill to pay me for my time. I took the survey. Some people, I'm sure, took the $20 bill, put it in their pocket, and threw the letter out. Non-response bias, right? But do I physically mail it to people? Nowadays, I can send emails, right? And if I send 100,000 surveys and I get 5% response, that's still 5,000 surveys. That's not bad. I got some data. I'll have to look at it for bias. Do I do an online web survey? A number of years ago, the British Navy got a new tugboat, and they held a public survey to name the boat. Anybody remember this, a psychotic idea? Anybody know what the name of the boat ended up being? The winning by a huge margin of the web survey was Bodie McBoatface. I wish I was making it up. Google that, you'll have an amusing time. I think Chicago has public naming of all of their snowplows. So in the middle of winter, when you open the snowplow tracking app, it'll tell you which snowplow is where. You've got the white stuff. Ice Ice Baby. Those were all real snowplow names. I don't make this stuff up. I don't have to. So if I do a web survey, can I keep it private? Can I keep that link to, say, members, to people I want to have? You looked up Bodie McBoatface, right? I'm telling you, it's hysterical. Does it say when it is on the Wikipedia page? When it was? So yeah, there you go. It's not even 10 years old yet. Phone surveys. Again, if I want to call people, do you answer your cell phone if you don't recognize the number? You answer your cell phone, period. If anybody call you, a lot of people only use this as a texting device. I understand. But I know people who have literally never answered their cell phone. My father uses his cell phone to call out, period. He does not accept incoming calls. He's always with my mother. She's got the phone she'll use all the time. Call her. My dad's phone used to live in his glove box for emergency use only. It was barely ever on. Okay, fine. But the way I decide on how I'm going to do the survey and how I'm going to administer it, that is part of figuring out what kind of biases my data will generate. Once I've decided on a type, I'll actually design the questions. Designing questions is important. A lot of people will design 2 or more questions to ask the same thing in different ways so that those 2 questions verify each other. We did a test here at Seton Hill and did one where we did a 1 to 5 scale and 1 was bad and 5 was good. And like 3 questions later, we had it reversed and 5 was bad and 1 was good. Nobody noticed, unfortunately, which pissed me off. But that's an important thing to figure out. Pre-test the survey. Before you go out and ask 100,000 people these questions, you should know if you're going to get useful information out of these questions. Maybe ask 50 people and ask them if the questions are clear or well understood. Talk with the group in your staff from step 2. Does this make sense? Revise if you need to. This is your first draft and your editor's commentary. Then actually administer it. You've gathered a pile of data. What are we going to do now? We're going to figure out what it says. And depending on whether it's qualitative data, discrete numerical, continuous numerical, what level of measurement we get out of it, that allows us to figure out the better ways to do that analysis. And there are a lot of different types of analysis we can do. We'll go over the majority of univariate and bivariate statistics that we can do in this course, but there's a lot more. A lot of questionnaire designs, the American Statistical Association, the Pew Research Center, the Rand Corporation, all have lots of resources on how to design questions. So when you're going to do a survey, going to those websites and asking, do I want to make this an open-ended question? Do I want to make this a multiple choice question? Do I want to make this a ranked choice question? Do I want to make this a scale question? Do I want to use little pictures? You know, the pain scale one, how do you feel today? Smiley face, not quite smiley face, straight line, frown, huge frown. The wording of your question affects your answer. You can rig a question to get an answer you want. A push or a pull of a question is something we should design, well, we should have in mind when we design our questions. What questions do you have for me at this point? Okay, that's the end of this chapter. And that's data collection and gathering. So the next discussion is on doing some of the analysis. We'll look at descriptions of data. This first description of data stuff is all visual. We're gonna do a lot of this by hand for some of the drawings because Excel sucks at some of them. We're gonna do a lot of this in Excel. So we'll talk about all the possible charts and graphs and things that we can make, what their benefits are and their detriments are on Friday. I will see you all then. Hopefully they will come switch our switcher out, so we won't have to worry about the technology then either. Have a wonderful rest of your day.